Hello, hello. Welcome to Latinx YC, where we discuss all the good, the bad, the ugly of U.S. politics from a Latino and Latina and Latinx perspective. My name is Clemencia Herrera, and I am the founder of Moyer Studio, an advertising agency that works with the Latinx community to promote progressive political and advocacy campaigns.
I am Cecilia del Cid, an environmental and social justice practitioner, an immigrant from Latin America, from Guatemala, a community weaver, and I'm also working on media. ¿Cómo están?
Hola, hola.
Hola, mi amor.
And so we're on our second episode from Women's History Month, and we're asking women around the U.S. who hold office in politics. So they've gone through it. The topic's about being a woman and being Latina and being in politics. So all the intersection between all those things. And today we're very excited to have Councilmember of Fresno County and candidate to the California State Assembly, Esmeralda Soria. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Bienvenida.
Nice to see you guys.
So Esmeralda was born and raised in Tulare County by Mexican immigrant parents who believed in the American dream for their children. She has a law degree from University of California, Berkeley, and Juris Doctorate from the University of California, Davis School of Law. Focusing on immigration law in 2015, her passion for community work and social justice drove her to run and obtain the title of Council Member for District 1 in Fresno. As a council member, she has focused on affordable housing, creating jobs, and providing Fresno youth opportunities to grow personally and professionally. Councilmember Soria was appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom to serve on his transition team, where she's voiced the needs of the Central Valley, where she grew up, and she's been appointed to his homeless task force to help the houseless community in the state to find a place to call their home. She was also elected to serve as the president of the League of California Cities Latino Caucus, where she looks forward to ensuring that Latino families are shaping policy that will affect our communities. And most recently, Councilmember Soria was appointed to the League of California Cities Governance Task Force. Not small achievements here.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, and welcome. So honored to have you with us.
I'm honored actually to be on here.
Thank you. So today I'd love to hear, lots about you, Councilmember. What is some stories about you being a Latina that has run for office, that is running for office now. Why did you decide to do it, and what have been the challenges or the beautiful things about it? Tell us.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I'm a daughter of farm worker immigrants. And so growing up here in the Central Valley, I think at a very early age, I became aware of just the disparities that existed amongst our community. And so, I've been reflecting on this since I knew that I was going to be part of your show, and thinking about those moments in my life that really have steered me in the direction that I've gone to. And I can point to a couple instances. One, when my grandfather, who was a bracero, came here to this country, and then fast forward in the 90s, became a U.S. citizen. And in the 1992 elections was the first time that he was voting. And so I remember sitting with him in the evenings, watching Univision and the presidential debates or discussions about, who was running for president at the time. And so that was kind of, as a 10-year-old girl, learning about the importance of voting through my grandfather, who didn't speak a lick of, English, but knew that it was important for him to vote. So thinking about that moment, and then fast forward a few years later, when I actually had the opportunity to go to a leadership program program in Sacramento. It's called the Chicano Latino Youth Leadership Project, where I had the opportunity to walk through the Capitol, to meet not many, but a few people that look like me. And so I think those moments as a young person kind of really showed me that, one, there was a need, there was an importance of being civically engaged, but more importantly, that we needed to be in those places, because I recognized that in those places, decisions were being made that were impacting our families. And so I think those were the moments that kind of stayed with me and really steered me in the direction of being in public service and getting involved in the community. What has been important for me is that our community has a seat at the table, and that we have a voice that is represented with our experiences that we come from. First generation, English language learner, parents that are immigrants, and learning the importance of getting a college education, but further more, also learning of the inequities and trying to change the narrative for our community. And so when I had the opportunity to come back, to move to the Valley after I went to school, that I was reminded by what my mother always taught me: to whom much is given, much is required. And I felt like even though we struggled growing up, that much was given to me as an individual, where I did obviously work hard, but that now, because I had achieved, what some people would consider levels of success, that I needed to make sure that I paved the way forward for other people and try to mitigate some of those challenges that myself and then my family experienced growing up. And so that's really been kind of the drive behind, running for office and being in an elected position, where I've had the honor to represent, the fifth largest city in the state of California, and move policy in a direction to help elevate the conversations around working families.
Yeah, it's so important to recognize that there's decisions being made that are affecting us, and we're not sitting at many tables, first of all. And second of all, we're not electing people that are going to sit at those tables that are, going to, work for us. So these are two really important points to think about, when we're talking about, first, Latinos running for office, and second, Latinos coming out to vote. These are two main reasons, and you just define them. And it was so important that you discovered that at such a young age.
Yeah. No, yeah. And then even, I think along my journey, I started to obviously gain more knowledge, but just what you said, I think for me, I was probably after I had finished college, but reinforce again the importance of being at the table. And I heard this, I didn't come up with it, but if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that has been the case for, communities of color and our Latino community. And so that's why representation does matter, not just an elected office. I think when we think about the private sector and other industries in our community, we need to make sure that our communities are represented, because a lot of times for young people, you can't be what you can't see.
Yeah.
Esmeralda, thank you very much for sharing all that. Is there any when you think of you're talking about the impact that you had, your grandparents had, your grandfather, are there any Latino women that have been an inspiration for you as you were conceiving or kind of forming your identity, or that have moved you towards participating in politics instead of participating in community organizing in other manners? Why into politics and not in other avenues? And some of the people who have inspired you, or maybe that you felt like the trailblaze ahead of you, and that you're standing on their shoulders.
Yeah, well, I think that if we think about, I I guess kind of locally or in my circles, there hasn't been a lot, which is the interesting piece. There are a couple kind of women, Latinas locally, that came maybe over, 2 decades ago. But that has been it. I think really what I think about when I think about, Latinas who have broken ceilings and those kinds of things, there are in other parts of the state, but in my region, there hasn't been a lot. But I look to those other women, and not just in politics, but even in, like, civil rights, legend, Dolores Huerta, right? I've had the pleasure of sitting with her. I can call her on the phone and she'll take my call, but having that type of connection in our communities.
I know, right?
But it's like, but thinking about those women who haven't been in, elected officials, but have impacted what elected officials do. So it's been kind of those type of leaders and women in I guess in my life that have made that difference for me. The source of inspiration is from my family. When I think about women, I think about my mom, and I think about the fact that she played so many or wore so many hats, as an immigrant mom, as someone that was trying to make sure that her kids did well in school, but at the same time wanted to show us that she could do it herself, because she went back to school to try to get her high school diploma, to show us that education to her was very personal. And so when I think about everything that I do, it is my mom, and she was, she's never been an elected, but it was, her teachings. It's never forget where you come from. Make sure that you give back to your community. And in some shape or form, she taught us that when we were, young in my family. And interestingly, in my immediate family, there's four women, and then my brother, he's the baby, but all of us 4 have been elected. So my oldest sister did a short stint in the city council in the city of Lindsay, where we grew up. She quickly learned, politics is not for everyone, or elected office. It's tough. It's tough being, a mom, being a professional, and politics, or being an elected official also can get ugly with the politics, especially today, right? The division that exists. And then I have a younger sister. I have a younger sister that is currently on the school board, and then my baby sister who sits on the hospital district. So, we don't come from a line of elected officials in our family, but we have definitely made it a point to put public service as, a top priority in our lives.
That's amazing.
And I think also, like, you refer to it as public service, right? So you look at your position as in service of others. And I wonder, I think one of the things I hear a lot is like how politicians are like not looked at as public servants, that they are there to serve their own interests, family interests, corporate interests, the interests of others. And I appreciate that you are centering that so much, because that's like, you're there because you're representing other people. So that's public service. You are looking at the when you make decisions or put policy forward, you're trying to think of like benefits to the majority of people, right? So like to look at services of the public. And I appreciate you grounding it in that language, that it is a service and that is for the public. And I don't know how many times I've heard people that are elected frame it that way. So thank you.
No, absolutely. Service, I think, for me is number one. That was when I first got elected, and I've worked for other elected officials, and everyone has their separate style. But one of my commitments to the community that elected me, 8 years ago, was that was my mission and goal, to make sure that they were able to interface with me, to have connection, to make sure that they knew that I was there to represent and serve the needs of, the constituents that elected me and put me in office. And that's what we've done I think we've probably done the most community engagement ever before in our local city. In the short time that I've been on the council, we've had the most community meetings, over 65 community meetings, just to interface with folks. And that's critical. It's not just like one town hall a year, but it's making sure that you're interfacing and being accessible to those that entrusted in you.
Do you mind sharing with us, if any, challenges that you've run into as a Latina running for office? You just mentioned that there weren't that many Latinas in office in your district. So were there any barriers of entry that you experienced? Was it, how was your experience? Was it easy? Was it?
No, not at all. Not at all. But I think it's important to talk about those challenges because they're very real, and we have to, I think it's important for women to know up front what they're going to get into. One of the biggest challenges that I experience getting into running myself was that people questioned my ability to serve because at the time I was a lot younger. I was in my early 30s, so people questioned my experience, even though they didn't of my male counterparts who had less education, less experience than the one that I was bringing to the table. And so that was a frustrating part of seeing that I felt like I always had to prove myself, and I always had to mention, but I'm an attorney. And so when I would say that I'm an attorney, now all of a sudden this brown woman had some credibility, going into the rooms. But those were very real. Or even, people having preconceived notions about who I was and what was I about, rather than giving me an opportunity to demonstrate to them what I was, what I represent, and what I wanted to do. And, at the end of the day, it's still, at least in my community, it's still very much, kind of a good old boy, or, mostly men. I have been able to, in the last 7 years, really move some great policies because I've been able to work effectively with my male counterparts. But there were times that I was frustrated because I can't go fishing with my colleagues or go camping with my colleagues and build a stronger bond, right, than just the everyday office work, right? Because that's how you build relationship. But because of the gender dynamics, sometimes because I'm the only, I think maybe if there was one or two more women, it would be different, but I'm still the only woman. And so those are still challenges that I face today.
That's a great point you bring up about, very activities that we're just not into, that if there were other women, the activity would probably change. Right? Let's do some more inclusive activities. Yeah. Rather than golfing, come and do something that,
yeah. And I've had to take some of those things. Yeah, I've had to. I'm not a very good golfer, but I've had to learn to be in those spaces, right, and navigate them because you recognize that work is getting done in those spaces.
Yeah, that's where conversations are happening, and if we're not including those conversations. Yeah, that's frustrating, but hopefully we'll be changing that little by little.
It does change. I think as more women, right, run for office, I think it changes the dynamic. I think if I would just have one other woman serving with me, I think the dynamics could be different. Not to say that they're bad. I think initially, it was a little bit more challenging for me, but with time, and you get to know your colleagues in a little bit, much more in a much more, friendlier way or whatnot. And so you're able to build that friendship. But I think those are challenges that a lot of women still have. And we have to learn how to navigate them to still be successful.
Yeah. And I also think that some of these should come, just as much as the private sector has these DEI initiatives, which is like, not only are we trying to attract more people of color and women, we're also trying to keep them, right? Retain them. And I'm sure there's an issue with retention as well, in politics. And it's like, if this is a hostile environment for a woman or for a Latina to come into, yes, maybe you're by sheer just resolve and passion for what you want to do with your community, you're gonna put up with it, and you're gonna just power through it and learn how to golf and learn how to swim and fish and all this all these things that all the boys club is doing. Just because you're so passionate about it. But I'm sure that there's a lot of women out there that are some of these things are keeping them from running for office, because they're like, what am I gonna find? Like just a bunch of guys in that room that maybe they don't want me there. And there's so many real barriers of entry that women are experiencing, that it's also, I think, the job of like each government office to say, okay, we need to remove the barriers of entry. We need to make it easier for women to be here and to be comfortable and to feel like they can voice their concerns in a safe place, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's critical. I don't know so much if it will happen, directly from the institutions, but I think that there are great organizations trying to, do that work. And one of the groups, or one of the organizations that really helped me get the confidence, because it's not like I woke up one day and I said, oh, I'm going to run for office. No, it's like it took, 30 some years of building the confidence to feeling like, hey, I can run for office. Like I am well capable. I am smart enough. I can do this. And I should, be able to build support to get elected. And so, but it was a women's network. It was a leadership institute that I did. It's called Hispanas Organized for Political Equality, which helps Latinas in California build their leadership skills and kind of, push you to wherever you're supposed to be. It not necessarily an elected office, but it could be in the private sector, right? We still, to this day, see the numbers that are very disproportionate when it comes to women at the top, in the corporate sector, even sometimes in the public sector as well. And so trying to, work with organizations like those to begin to really change and see better representation.
Yeah, no, and it's really important because it's not in our head, right? Some of these issues are not in our head; they're very real. But what these leadership programs are teaching us is just to power through and try to break through those real things that are happening, because it's not like, oh, they're gonna think that I am underqualified. No, they do think that this is not like an ideation that we just came up with, like, oh, I'm just scared that they might think. No, they do think that I'm underqualified, even though I am, like you said, I'm an attorney, or even though, there's just so many things that are not in our head. And so, this keeps coming up in so many conversations of like, no, we're not crazy. We're not imagining things. These are very real fears, very real issues that we're coming up against, that, they might try to gaslight us about like, no, this is all, no, that doesn't really happen. It's all in your head.
No, it does.
They're very real.
So when you think about, you were saying how you want to give it back, make it. What would be your dream, like, for Latinas out there, young Latinas who are beginning to get involved in maybe community organizing or thinking about, man, I would like to run a campaign, but I really do not even know where to begin. What were some of those initial questions you had maybe when this ideation began to, circle in your head and think like, this is something I want to try for? How do you put your team together? What were some of those kind of, like, I don't know, I don't want to call them tips, but some of the basic kind of foundational work that you had to think through to put yourself in a position to?
Yeah, I will tell you that that's a very good question. So for me, I feel like I was in a very unique situation because I did work for elected officials prior to being elected. So, right after college, I got a fellowship in Sacramento. And so I worked for an elected official there. Then I had the opportunity to move back to the Valley and work for elected officials. So I kind of, because I'd been doing the behind the scenes work, I kind of saw a little bit of what it took. I didn't realize how much work it was when I decided to run, but I quickly leaned into the networks that I had. I think one of the important pieces of when you run for office is raising money. And we know that that's a huge challenge. I hate asking, but it's a very critical component of being successful. You can't run a successful campaign without any money. You just can't. And how do you do that, right? It's tough. I think what I've learned over time and what I'm dealing with today, as I'm running for state assembly, is really leaning into the network that I have been able to develop especially in the last 2 decades. Every network that I've had with women, with my classmates, with my professional colleagues, trying to reach out with my family, right? If those people that you've met along the way will invest in you, then it's easier for you to then go ask other folks, because your own community, your own people that you are connected to are willing to invest in you. And then you can go speak about that to other folks that you're requesting them to, out of the blue, they don't know anything about you, to invest in you. So it's been really an important piece, but it's been a very hard piece. And I think understanding that that's critical for someone that wants to run for office, I think is important. But aside from the financial piece, it's also important to surround yourself with good, good mentors and people that you can trust that will help you along the way, because it is tough. It's tough to run for office. It's not easy. And, you may win some and then you may lose some. I have run for Congress in the last election cycle and I didn't win, but I gave it my all. But it didn't mean that I'd give up in doing what I wanted to continue to do, which is provide a voice for working families in the region that I've grown up in. And so I think that a lot of times, and for me personally, we get stuck in those moments of what some people would call failures, but I don't call them as failures. I just, they're learning experiences that only make us stronger to get to wherever we're supposed to be next. But really is building the network of people that will support you along the journey. I think that that's extremely critical. And then getting a really good team that knows what the heck they're doing, right? Because you're going to have to be focused on being the candidate and not being the campaign manager and the field manager or the volunteer coordinator. You can't do all of that. You have to have all the pieces that will make your campaign successful. And I think people have to ask questions. I've never had anyone in my family that had run for office before, but you ask questions to other folks that may have experienced that or have some type of connection in doing those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. How important it was to communicate your platform?
Oh, it's extremely critical because that's the way that you connect with the voters. And that's why being able to raise enough money is extremely important in communicating what you represent or what you're going to prioritize as part of your platform. And a lot of that is learned through really learning from the community, listening. That's what I did. I spent about a year, like before I ran for council, I spent about a year walking and talking to voters, walking door to door and listening, not even telling them what I wanted to do. I spent a year asking people, what is it that you want to see in your city? What is it that you want to see in your neighborhood? And my priorities really were derived from the listening that I did for a whole year.
Wonderful. That, is, that's impressive. I think I don't remember. Maybe it happens more about local, at our local level, but when whenever I felt like I am in a more rural setting or not, when I've lived in places that have been very much majority white in Massachusetts and in rural Massachusetts. And I think sometimes as a Latino voter, you have so little opportunity to really to hear candidates that are thinking about even considering about what you would like to see as a citizen in your community. Mm-hmm. So to hear you say, I spent a year talking to my potential voters, it's just so inspirational.
Yeah, but it's hard, right? It's you have to commit the time, but it's hard. Go ahead, Glenn.
No, I was just going to say, I think this is why the Latinos are so disenchanted with so many politicians because the majority is not Latino, so we're not going to listen to them. And so, the thing is that frame of mind has been going on for so long. And guess what? We're not minority anymore. We're not just this little group over here, just that we could just brush off on the side. We are going to be a fourth of the US population. And so this is why Latinos have been so disenchanted and so unmotivated about politics. It's Ceci just said it. Nobody has really asked me about what I care about. And, and only, people like you, Esmeralda, that are actually, that are Latina, that actually have heard the concerns of your community from just growing up, are the only people that are going to be now saying, hey, we actually need to listen to them and see what they have to say. And not just because, we got to check the box. It's no, this is actually very important to me.
Yeah, I think what I've learned too along the way is how do you make it relatable, right? What we do as an elected official and make pretty much break it down to our community, right? And them learn, why they should care about the work that I do. And a lot of it is kind of civic education, right? Because a lot of our community doesn't know. They don't know what a council member does. Or I think even to this day, my parents don't really know what I do, and that's just a matter of fact, they're excited because they see me from time to time on TV or they know that I'm doing, positive work in their mind, but they don't really know or didn't know what a council member did previously to me being elected. And so I think a lot of our families are in the same position. That's why I believe that making sure folks are able to connect the dots and that we're able to connect the dots for them is extremely critical. And that's much more doable when you're in local government, which is why I felt it was critical that I spent a lot of time in the neighborhoods talking to the actual residents that were participants, and then also making sure that we registered those that weren't registered at the time. Now in California, things have shifted quite a bit. So now there's automatic registration, which is a good thing. But when I first was running, that wasn't the case. And there was a lot of Latinos that were, and still to this day, are low propensity voters. But we spent a lot of time very intentional about targeting low propensity Latinos because we knew that when we talked to them, when we listened to them, that they cared and that you could actually convince them to vote for you, which was amazing. I ended up winning by 600 votes, and we had a targeted program where we had targeted 500 specific Latinos that were low propensity voters, that they went from being poll voters to voting at home. And so that's how we were able to track them and make sure that they turned in their ballots. And that's what really helped us win. I ended up winning by 600 votes. So that margin really was because we spent time with our Latino community.
What are some of your biggest successes? Some of the things that you feel like super proud or orgullosa that you're like, I help with that?
One of the things I will say, it's very small, and I think I had shared it a couple days ago, but was right after I got elected. I had my swearing in ceremony, and I had one of my friends who was a young mom. And she told me after we had the ceremony that the day that she went to go see me get sworn in, she had to take her baby and put him on the ground to change his diapers. And I was like, well, why is that happening? We're now in, 2015. I'm like, you would think that in our public facilities, we would accommodate it for moms and dads. Well, that wasn't the case. So one of the first things that I did within the first few months that I was in office, we made sure that there was not just baby changing tables in the women's restrooms, but in the men's restrooms. But beyond that, we created a family room at City Hall that would televise the city meetings, and the parents could be in the family room. And we created nursing rooms for our mom employees that were nursing to encourage, right? Who wants to eat their lunch in the restroom? No one does, right? And for many years, our young moms that were breastfeeding, who didn't have a private office, and you only usually get a private office if you're very high up in the hierarchy. And so where would they go? They would go to the restrooms. So we created specific nursing rooms for our employees and for even the public. So when they came to our public facility, they would have that. So that's one of the neat things that I feel super proud of. But beyond that, we've been able to by the time that I leave, we would have invested in 3 parks in my district. We would have built affordable housing in one of the areas that was very, just economically depressed and had no housing in a transit-oriented corridor. We have been able to bring infrastructure investments to communities that for far too long had been left behind. And so some of those very tangible projects I'm super proud of, just because we are seeing them get built, get completed in our community. And so I'm super excited about coming back, because I'll finish in December, but the two of the parks won't be completed until after I leave. But I'm super excited just to come back to see them when they cut the ribbon. Because these communities, it was a park that was promised 30 years ago. And I learned about it listening to the voters when I was walking in their neighborhood. But those are some of the really cool things that, I can point to that I've done. And then during the pandemic, we had just the unprecedented amount of response that we did to ensure that, families didn't lose their homes by providing them rental relief, making sure the small businesses didn't lose the business owners didn't lose their businesses because they weren't getting the type of business, pre-pandemic. So making sure that there was relief, especially for those that majority Latino or, minority-owned businesses that didn't qualify or didn't know how to apply for the PPP dollars at the federal level. And so we really focus on trying to make sure that we provided relief for all these various groups that weren't getting the relief elsewhere.
And this is why it matters for someone from the community to actually be in a position of power, because they know the challenges and the needs of the community more than anyone else. So Awesome. That was amazing. Congratulations for getting all that stuff done for the community. This is all the time that we have, and thank you so much for coming on and telling us your story and telling us all the amazing things you've done in your part of the world. And if you'd like to know more about Councilmember Esmeralda's campaign, you can go to soriaforcalifornia.com. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can go to LatinXYZ Pod on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. You can email me, clem@latinxyzpod.com. If you like this podcast, please share with your friends, give us a rating. And if you're out in Fresno, Councilmember Esmeralda Soria is running for she's running for the state assembly. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ladies. Looking forward to just continuing to keep tabs on you guys and your guys' podcast. Excited to see that there's a platform where folks can share their stories and we can learn from each other.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much for sharing your wonderful work and your journey. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.